complete wrong track. And I'm so optimistic that in the preparation of the summit, we will come together. Our heads of state of government will be there. Our prime minister has told me that he will be there in Reykjavik as well. So if the prime minister of the Netherlands is there, everybody will be there. Ursula von der Leyen will be there. The Bundeskanzler will be there. That will be a historic summit, and I think that it would be an honor for us all, and for me personally as well, to be engaged in that historic meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do hope that the only difference between the video that we saw, of course, at the beginning of the day is that the British delegation will not be smoking cigars this time in the middle of the room. But other than this, of course, your point about the strength of the system is only as strong as its constituent parts, I think is a very good reflection also for the discussion we'll have later. Thank you very much. Mr. Dane, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, esteemed delegates, Mr. President, colleagues. It's an honor for me to be here. And when Professor Oomen was speaking about the days she would always remember, I was thinking, which day would I remember most about multilateralism? And about how difficult it is to take the right decision. So I want to take you back to a very personal experience 9 years ago, which was my very last visit to Crimea. When I was working for the OSCE, another multilateral organization that is going through very difficult times, I was working for a high official who had an impossible choice ahead of her. We were asked by the government of Ukraine to write a human rights assessment report. We were an impartial, independent monitoring body of the OSCE, just like the Council of Europe has them. And we knew what was going to happen. And I told the high official, Excellency, I am going to write a report that is going to cost you your job. Because I will put on the report where this peninsula belongs, and we will put in there that there's human rights violations, and the country that will receive this report is the one that can veto your extension of your mandate. And she said, yes, I know. But what's the point in me having this job if I don't do it? So go ahead, write a report. We did. She did get vetoed 2 years later by the Russian Federation. We had no more access to Crimea after that anymore. But we did the right thing. I feel we did the right thing, but the price was high. The price was very high because after that, almost no more international visits. The Council of Europe managed once more to visit. And after that, all the citizens living there, many of whom were very unhappy with what was going on, I can personally assure you, especially the Crimean Tatars, no longer benefited from the scrutiny that we could provide as multilateral organization. Because we spoke, as Secretary General, you spoke also about the dilemmas, and I think we'll speak more about it. The inclusion versus isolation debate in multilateralism. I think her personal dilemma that she had at the time is also one that organizations have as a whole. If you do the right thing, if you stand up for the values that these organizations represent, they are, after all, a community of values. That does mean that you lose something else. You lose access, you lose the opportunity to have the violator at the table, you lose the opportunity to have a dialogue, but sometimes there's no dialogue left anymore. I sometimes look at videos of the OSCE Permanent Council, and if you look at the most recent one, you actually see everybody walking out as the Russian delegate is speaking. Somehow it's still, as somebody who spent 12 years in that organization, it still pains me to see that. It pains me to see that what is meant as a tool for dialogue, a tool for crisis management, a place where you can hold each other to account, when you can have a free and fair discussion about values and commitments, has become a place of monologues, of almost pointless monologues, to the point that diplomats feel they rather walk out than to listen to it. And I think that dilemma is unique for each and every organization. The Council of Europe has chosen to be principled, even though you struggled with it as well. I remember the time when the voting rights of the Russian delegation were already restricted and later restored. That dilemma is not new to you. The OSCE is still going through this every day, this dilemma, and we don't know how it's going to end. We don't even know if there will be an OSCE, actually. We're looking forward. It might be quite difficult. But ultimately, we need to look at why these organizations exist. They exist to uphold values. They exist to also create a platform for an exchange on these values and the ability to hold each other to account. And they exist as tools to help the citizens of the countries, as Professor Oomen pointed out, to get the protection that these commitments give them. And if they can no longer fulfill that purpose, then multilateralism is not just at a crossroads, it's on the edge of the abyss. Yeah. And that is a really serious matter. I hope that Reykjavik will re-energize the Council of Europe, the OSCE was hoping that Helsinki 75, or Helsinki plus 50 would re-energize the OSCE. And in this sense, I'm not a pessimist, actually, because sometimes things really have to get worse before they get better. The Council of Europe was born in the aftermath of a gruesome war. And the CSCE, the predecessor to the OSCE, was born after the Cuba crisis, after really a serious East-West crisis that brought the world also to the brink of a very serious conflict. So maybe things still need to get worse first before they get better. But I think I can only agree with you, Mr. President, that this opportunity is there for the leaders now to come together, to reaffirm the values that they stand for. And I sincerely hope that at some point there will again be a representative from the Russian Federation who also again adheres to these values. It may take an incredible long time. The Minister Wierwin spoke about how long it takes for justice to be reached. It may also take a very long time before we again see representatives from the Russian Federation at the table adhering to these values. But I sincerely hope that they will come and that this horrible dilemma of inclusion versus isolation can again fall to the side of inclusion. I thank you.
Thank you, Bob Dane. You've reflected, of course, also on the founding of the Council of Europe and also sort of where we are right now in terms of, you mentioned this abyss that we're standing on. Maybe now it's good to also reflect a little bit about the past 75 years of the Council of Europe. What actually have been its main achievements? What have it done over its lifetime? Actually, Barbara, I would like to ask you this question. In your opinion, looking back at these 75 years, what have been the key achievements and what have we learned from those achievements?
I think a key feature of the Council of Europe is, of course, these threefold foundations. So it's democracy, it's the rule of law, and it's human rights, not in that order, but in equal importance. And to me, the emphasis on human rights and strengthening human rights, strengthening the rule of law, in combination with strengthening democracy, to me, is a key achievement. And then, of course, you can expand on all kinds of human rights that have been strengthened and elaborated. As I said before, I think the role in the abolition of the death penalty is a very important one. The strengthening of minority rights is very important. The concluding of the Istanbul Convention and what it meant for gender-based violence in Council of Europe countries, I think, is a very important one. But to me, the bigger story is that of a specific kind of multilateralism, because here we speak about upholding multilateralism, but multilateralism, of course, comes in many shapes and forms and kinds. Eleanor Roosevelt always spoke about the United Nations as a bridge upon which we can meet and talk, and I had to think about that in listening to you, a bridge upon which we can meet and talk. And I've always thought that the language spoken in the, especially in the Council of Europe, is the language of human rights. And human rights, if you think about it, is not the most logical language for states to speak about and for states to commit themselves to, because in a way it's always about curtailing your own power as a state, about giving rights to citizens. And I do sometimes, in the rhetoric and in discussions on also the Council of Europe, feel a concern that with the geopolitics of the day and with the aggression of Russia, the role of human rights, the importance of human rights, is making way for another kind of multilateralism. And of course, if we think about Europe, the core identity of Europe as a community of values, what was decided here in The Hague in May 1948, and the role of those values, permanently upholding them, also where it gets difficult, also where it comes close to home. I think to me that is a major achievement of the Council, not only of the Court, but of the Council at large. And that is something to cherish and strengthen, especially in hard times such as these.
Thank you very much. I think maybe we can have one more sort of question to the audience and then we can move to Q&A. I was thinking, you made me think with your words also about another kind of multilateralism and different ways of also interpreting perhaps multilateralism in different parts of the world, inside Europe and beyond. And maybe it's a double question perhaps to the President and to Bob Dane, in a sense that if now, Mr. President, you mentioned that when we go to Reykjavik in May, you're open to think about, let's say, reaffirming this multilateral system and to think about it in a creative way, to reaffirm this sort of commitment that we have. Of course, multilateralism in many aspects, and we've seen it also with, of course, the vote of the United Nations General Assembly on the Russian invasion. Many countries, large countries who would adhere to this multilateral system, of course, have abstained from that vote. And I'm just wondering, within the confines, of course, of the Council of Europe, but perhaps also if Mr. Dane or Mr. Cox, you have words on this, how can we, let's say, make sure that multilateralism is truly felt and acted across the world, also beyond Europe, that it is felt and that it is inclusive as a system when we want to reaffirm our commitment to such multilateralism? If you have any thoughts on that, either of you, perhaps.
Perhaps if I refer to what Professor Oman said, it's not just multilateralism, because multilateralism can also be an agreement. If you do something wrong, I look the other way. And if I do something wrong, you look the other way. And sometimes in the past, multilateralism seemed to be like that. I think the multilateralism that was invented, you could say, here in the Hague Congress, it was going far deeper. It was the idea, if we do not work together by developing ourselves, not by delivering us to some other powers, but by strengthening ourselves, if we don't do that along the lines of protecting, promoting the rule of law, human rights and democratic societies, then we all will end up in hell. We have to bear in mind that in 1948 this whole continent was in shackles. The thought that the Third World War was there in days, weeks or months was accepted throughout Europe. We probably would not be able to resist a Third World War. And the only way to do it, to convince each other that only by developing our countries along these lines, these values as we call them, then we could protect ourselves and we could protect Europe and thereby the rest of the world. The people who were then, the 750 people who were there then in The Hague and those who followed afterwards in the Council of Europe, they are no saints. I hope I do not insult my colleagues of the Parliamentary Assembly, but probably when there is the moment that we have to knock on heaven's door, probably they will say there, politician, first rate. We do deal first with the better people, but we are no saints. But we do not have to be saints in realizing the rationale that if we work on the basis of this value-based multilateralism, probably this is the best thing for us all to happen. Therefore, we have to keep it lively. I'm looking to my predecessor, Rick Daams, who worked very hard to convince the Committee of Ministers that we have to update fundamental rights. For example, when we see all young people here demonstrating, that they say, listen, please, you elderly people, take care that we have a fundamental access to free air and a safe environment. You have to deliver. And under the presidency of Rick Daams, we made progress. It is now accepted by the Committee of Ministers that this is a fundamental good idea. It will be on the agenda. I'm quite sure, I'm looking to the Secretary of State of Iceland, it will be on the agenda in Reykjavik, and the same goes for artificial intelligence. Here in the Netherlands, we had a government that had to step down because we were not able to have artificial intelligence matching with human rights. So I think we have to be innovative as well. We cannot only reaffirm what we decided in 48 and in 49 and in 50. We have to do more, but the system as such, in my opinion, it is not only for the good people to say, I cherish all these values, it is also for the not so good people, but who are realistic, understanding there is no better answer to brutal and unregulated unilateralism than functioning, value-based multilateralism. I hope that will be a driving force in Reykjavik, that wherever we come from, as Churchill said, and whatever our political tendency, we realize that there is no better answer. And if there's no better answer, we have to give the answer so that is best at this moment in this existential times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bob Dane, do you have anything to add to that, from your perspective?
No, I can only agree. I mean, we're here at a meeting of a regional organization. We're very Europe-focused, and of course, it's the Council of Europe, so that it's fair that we do that. But your question was also about multilateralism in the rest of the world. I'm afraid it's not such a rosy picture. Yes, we can look at voting records in the UN General Assembly, but it's not as if that is a unilateral rise to only more and more countries condemning Russia. If you look at the ones who are abstaining, they actually represent a fairly sizable part of the world's population. The problem is that we are by default Eurocentric because we're from here and we think that way, and many of the instruments were invented here. The minister mentioned Hugo de Groot. That doesn't necessarily mean the rest of the world sees it that way. And I think we need to be very cognizant that there is a narrative out there that Russia is spreading very actively that resonates incredibly well in Africa, in the Middle East, in the whole global south, actually. And sometimes that narrative is amplified by a tendency that especially the United States has lately started to divide the world in democracies versus autocracies. That has a very polarizing effect, and somehow then other countries could start to see human rights and democracy as Western tools of influence and domination. No, they're not. Yeah, because we're firmly convinced, again, we are convinced, that that's the best way to live. And actually, I think if you would ask most people, how would you like to live? They probably want to live that way. But the ones sitting in the UN are not necessarily the people. They're governments. And not all of them have an incentive to want to free up and give human rights to their entire population because it could jeopardize their hold on power. So actually, I think we should not only defend multilateralism in Europe, we should defend it worldwide. And we cannot do that by only passing the same narrative over and over again, that our truth is the best truth and you should listen to us. We have to really be better at tailoring this message. This is also a task for diplomats worldwide, as they try to make countries understand that the Russian narrative is a very nefarious one, the way they try to even use the colonial language. It's amazing. If you look at some of Putin's speeches, he's trying to weave everything together, that it's also that we are the colonizers, and he is invading a country and we're the colonizers. So we have to be really good at reaching these target audiences, not just from the high moral perspective, but we have to be able to also understand their point of view, because only then is it also their multilateralism and not just ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, reflecting on the importance of narratives and also contact between people. I think it's time now to move to the questions from the audience, if there are any. I believe there's a few. So I will see a couple of hands raised, and I will give you the floor with the mic over there in the background. So I see one hand raised over there. And please make sure to make your questions quite brief and concrete, because of course we have limited time before also the session that comes up next. So please, I think over here there is one person. Yeah, get the mic too.
Senator Gorlitz, I'm from Romania. When codifying the law in international relations, this should reflect the fundamental developments within our societies. The convention was adopted in 1950. Since then, 16 protocols of amendment, or let's say optional protocols, looking on different generations of fundamental human rights. My question is very simple. I'm interested in having your academic and scientific view, because the fundamental development is called now crime of aggression. And this happened not in Africa, not in Asia, was committed by a member of the Council of Europe in our common home called Europe, and violating the European Convention of Human Rights. Should we at least dare to think to the possibility to work and to adopt an amendment protocol to the European Convention of Human Rights, offering the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights here in Europe for the crime of aggression, knowing that the substance of the crime of aggression, Article 8 bis from Kampala, amendments adopted in 2010 to the Rome Statute, it's already there, which obviously is repeating the London Convention from 1933. Should we dare at least to think to this possibility beyond the bigger discussion of establishing a separate tribunal for crime of aggression, which currently seems to be somehow complicated? Thank you.
One of the panelists like to answer that question? Yeah, of course, Barbara, please.
Well, I think it's a very interesting question. Of course, we know how difficult it has been to codify the crime of aggression. The discussion on codifying and criminalizing the crime of aggression has been, I think, was already there when the Congress was founded, also in the context of the Nuremberg tribunals. When the Rome Statute was adopted, the International Criminal Court was founded, it was found too difficult to define the crime of aggression, and as you say, only in Kampala did the state parties to that statute, the Rome Statute, come to an agreement on the content, which means that the member states here that are also members to the Rome Statute also have that recourse. Now, what would the added value be of a protocol also committing to the protection of the crime of aggression within the context of the Council of Europe? Generally, but this is a discussion on, say, putting fundamental rights and codifying law in different places. And some people say if law is codified in one place and it's legally superfluous to codify it in another place, why do it? I must say that personally, but this is just a personal preference, having the discussion within the context of this body, debating the protocol, possibly adopting the protocol, saying here in this regional context something about the crime of aggression could add to the strengthening, I think, of this particular part of the international legal order. So, but this is a personal preference. I find it an interesting and valuable line of thought, and of course in times where this crime is all too obviously there on this continent.
Thank you. I believe we have time for 2 more brief questions, and I will collect them in one go, so that we make maximum use of the time we still have, and then of course the panelists can answer. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, over there, I believe, yes. Okay, please go ahead, yeah.
Yes, hello dear friends, I'm a chairwoman of Ukrainian delegation. I think we are witnessing yet another historical moment for international law. And it's rather a short comment, if you allow me, because the crime of aggression has been inherited in our daily life on a daily basis. And we are so highly appreciating that ECHR, under the umbrella of this core organization dealing with human rights, finally, after 8 years of appeal, Ukraine versus Russia stated that the crime of aggression has indeed started in 2014, in March, with the illegal referenda and the attempt of annexing the peninsula of Crimea. Thank you for remembering the indigenous people, Crimean Tatars, which Her Excellency Madam Buric is focusing in her annual reports, and of course the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly reacting in our resolutions. Colleagues, we have passed, as members of this important organizations, 6 resolutions since February 2022, also dealing and suggesting to set up a special tribunal. And I would like to remind that I think there would be a PhD papers on that, because our latest resolution says at its front page that the ICC cannot possibly deal, no matter what we refer to Article bis 8 or Kampala amendments, or in general Rome Statute, which Russia has never had an intention. I would like to remind you they have back in the days they've signed it, but they've never ratified it. They don't have an intention to do so. Let's imagine they would one day. It will still be transferred to the Security Council of the UN, who has a veto power there, who has misused 151 times its veto power.